I had 9 days of flour in my ledger, and a boy with frostbitten toes that still went numb before dawn. When the cracked stove collar started leaking smoke, I knew the cold would keep what little healing he had. I packed mill sawdust into a dented tin drum and watched a black crescent scorch the floorboards where the heat bit too hard. By midnight, I kept my hand on the stove seam and listened to him breathe, waiting to see which one would hold till morning. October 1891. Near Iron Ridge, Michigan, in a logging camp clearing cut out of pine and birch, Clara Hensley kept a one-room board shack standing with wedges, rope, and patched boards. Cold rain had come early, and the wagon track to town was already rutted deep. She was 60, and in that place she did the work of caretaker, builder, cook, mender, and provider. Her grandson Toby was 8, small in the shoulders, and he still walked carefully because 2 toes on his left foot had frostbitten the previous winter. She had 9 days of flour, lamp oil for 6 nights if she trimmed the wick low, and a slab pile that looked bigger than it truly was. Iron Ridge was nearly 7 miles away, and once the low bridge iced over, it might as well be 20. If she could not hold steady heat before the first deep snow, Toby's healing toes would fail, and he would carry that damage for life. Morning light showed the first warning on the floorboards: frost feathers under the north wall and a dark crack climbing the old stove collar. Toby tried to help anyway. He lifted the short axe she had cut down for him and struck a pine knot. The head glanced off and jarred both wrists. The sound was weak. Clara took the axe back and set it behind the door. On the peg beside it hung a flour tag from Harlan's store, stamped 50 pounds, with pencil under it. Paid to November. 3 on washing. At the cot, Toby's toe wrapping lay open to dry, and the cloth was faintly pink where skin had split. The mill whistle blew for shift. Fine yellow sawdust skated across the yard and gathered in the fence corners. Clara watched it settle, waste to the camp, fuel to her, if she could make it burn slow. Oats went on the stove. Then she checked Toby's foot with the back of her hand. From under the tea tin, she took the blue ledger and wrote, October 11th, flour 9 days, oil 6 nights, Toby toes need warm nights. By midday, she had stuffed toe and clay in the wall seam and set Toby in a patch of sun by the shed. He hated sitting. He wanted to chop like the men, and instead, he watched her split kindling and stared at his own hands. Near noon, Milt Caro came for a shirt she had mended. He saw the short axe and grinned at Toby. Still too little, he said. Clara held out the shirt and asked for payment. Milt put a camp trade chit on the table, 15-cent store credit, company stamp crooked in the corner. She flattened it and wrote beside the date, Caro shirt, cuffs 15 cents. That paper went into the ledger. After he left, Toby asked if she could shorten the axe handle more. Clara said there was more than one way to feed a winter. That evening, she carried a grain scoop and burlap sack to the mill shed. Rusk Mallon, the foreman, was counting loads. She asked for floor sweepings. For what? He said. For heat. He laughed once and looked at Toby standing by the post in a blanket. Sawdust smokes. It burns if packed right. Maybe in brick, not in your tinder shack. Clara waited. Rusk shrugged. Take what lies under the wall after shift. If you burn the place, don't shout for me. By dark, she had 2 sacks of coarse shavings and 1 sack of fine dust. Toby carried a small flour sack full and stopped every few steps to flex his toes. At supper, she split their last pork scrap into the oat pot and saved the grease cup. Rain turned colder. The old stove drew poorly. Smoke leaked from the cracked collar and striped the rafters. At 9:10 by her nickel clock, she wrote on a wall scrap, "Stove collar leak. Draft pour in rain. Patch before hard freeze." She pinned it by the shelf, with a tack. Near midnight, Toby woke, shivering. His left foot had gone numb under the quilt. Clara warmed a stone by the coals. Art wrapped it in flannel and held it near his ankles until the feeling came back. The clock read 12:37 when he slept again. She stayed up listening to the collar hiss. At first light, she went to the refuse pile and found a dented tin drum. Knee-high, one side caved in, metal still sound. Einar, the filer, saw her dragging it and stepped over without a word. He stamped the dent flatter, found her a short pipe collar and a warped grate disc from an old heater, and said only, "Stone under it, not wood." That afternoon, Clara laid out tools while Toby counted them. Hammer, chisel, awl, auger, tin snips with a loose jaw, knife. She marked a circle on the drum top with charcoal and cut slow, resting twice. She fitted the collar and peened the tabs flat. For air, she punched holes low on one side and slit a longer slot with the chisel. At 3:40, the chisel skipped and burned her knuckle. She wiped the blood and kept working. Toby asked if the stove would roar. "It will breathe if I give it a throat." Toward evening, she packed the caved side with clay and ash to stiffen the metal. Mud, ash, and patient hands were what campwomen had. Rusk stopped at the door and saw the drum on the floor. "You aim to cook the boy?" "I aim to keep him walking." His eyes went to Toby's wrapped foot. Then he saw the sacks. "No more sweepings while men are on the floor." "I come after shift." "Then keep to that." He left. The next day, sleet rattled on the roof. Clara scraped a square clean near the room center and built a base from 2 stones, broken brick, packed sand, and a sheet of tin. Toby wrote October 13th on her work scrap in big, crooked letters. She left it there. To make the fuel charge, she stood a broom handle in the drum as a center form. Around it, she packed coarse shavings, then a ring of finer dust, then dust mixed with a little ash, tamped hard with a wooden pestle. Layer by layer, she pressed it tight. At 5:20, she pulled the broom handle. A clean draft shaft ran down the middle. Toby smiled hard. She lit a paper twist and eased a coal to the top. Nothing. Then a dull red line moved down the center. Heat rose. Then smoke spilled from the lid seam and rolled into the room. Toby coughed. Clara shut and opened the lower slot, tapped the collar, listened, tried again. The drum belched gray smoke. Failed draft. She dragged it into the sleet before the room filled. First failure. 1 hour lost. 1 warm coal bed wasted. She still wrote it down. October 13th evening. Packed too fine. Smoked back. All need more low air. At 2:05, Toby woke cold again, and she burned 2 slab pieces she could not spare. By dawn, the wood pile had sunk badly. Mrs. Pritchard from the cookhouse came over the next morning with a basket and curious eyes. She had heard the men betting which would go first, Clara's roof or her drum. Clara asked what needed mending. "A skirt hem, mittens too." Mrs. Pritchard looked at Toby's foot wraps and set down a parcel. Inside were cracked crock shards and a handful of nails. "For your stove base," she said. "Don't tell them I helped." By midday, Clara changed the heater. 6 more air holes, a sliding cover cut from a tobacco tin, a clay soot rope with a touch of pork grease pressed into the lid seam. The great disc set inside on 3 bolts for under air. At 1:15, she lit the second charge. This time, the center took cleaner. No smoke in the room. Toby held his hands toward it, grinning. For nearly an hour, the heat held steady. At 2:02, one green stone cracked. The drum tipped. Hot ash spat from the slot and dropped on the floor seam. Clara kicked the sandpan under fast, but a black crescent burned into the boards before it died. She stared at the mark. It was proof the drum threw real heat. It was proof a mistake could take the shack. Toby asked if she was done with it. No, she said. Now I know where it bites. She smothered the charge, hauled the drum outside, and rebuilt the base higher. Packed clay on the floor, brick shards, sand, tin, stones, pan under the slot. Then she pinned a second note on the wall. October 14th, 3:35. Floor, scorched east seam. Raise base 3 inches. Keep sandpan set. That note stayed up all winter. By evening, sleet turned to wet snow. Clara sat by the old stove and counted stitches in Toby's sock patch while he slept. 32 across the toe, 41 around the heel. She wrote the count on a scrap and tucked it in the ledger. It looked silly, written out. It kept cloth from failing by surprise. On October 17, the road bridge iced over. A teamster brought the news cursing the planks. No wagon run to Iron Ridge till noon thaw, maybe longer. Clara crossed salt off her store list. At 7:25, the rebuilt drum was running. At 8:10, Toby sat by it in stockings while she changed his toe wrap. The skin looked bad but living. By midday, the charge was only half spent. She fed the old slab stove once for cooking and once for drying. For the first time, she believed the wood might last into November. Camp people did not change with weather. 2 bunkhouse boys kicked her dust sacks and called her a hen scratching trash. A sawyer asked if she baked bread and saw chips. Rusk warned her not to block the mill floor. She took the sacks and kept moving. The cost came on October 19th. The mill clerk stopped her and said company orders were changed. Sweepings would be sold by measure now. She could have a half bushel on credit each day, charged to her ledger. He tore off a gray chit and pushed it at her. Another paper to prove she was short. She folded it and set it beside the shirt chit in her ledger. That night, by lamp, she wrote the numbers. Flour 6 days, oats 4, beans 3 pots, oil 4 nights, pork gone. Toby watched the pencil. Then he asked, "Did Mama know how to make a stove?" Clara kept writing one more line before she answered. She knew sewing and songs and how to laugh in hard weather. Why did she leave? The room stayed quiet except for the drum ticking as the charge settled. Outside, a dog barked toward the bunks. Clara set the pencil down. "She left after your father died at the river landing. A chain broke on a log turn. It was fast. She couldn't bear the camp after. She went south with kin and said she would send for you. No letter came." Toby looked at the floor. Did she forget? Clara pulled his blanket up around his shoulders. "I don't know what found her. I know what found us. That is enough for tonight." Before dawn on October 21st, the first hard freeze hit. At 4:50, Clara woke to a quiet drum. The charge had burned out too early. She opened the slot and found the lower holes clogged with ash and damp fines. Second failure. Not flame, duration. The room had dropped cold, and Toby's wrap edge was stiff. She fired the old stove hard, warmed his toes by hand, then dragged the drum into gray light and scraped the clinkers out with the awl. At 6:15, she added a note. Cold failure before dawn. Air holes choked. Clean at midnight. Course layer low. She traded Mrs. Pritchard a quilt repair for a bit of wire screen from the cookhouse flour sifter. It fit behind the lower slot and kept the ash from slumping shut. At 11:30 she packed another charge. Coarse curls low, finer dust above, one dry pine cone on top for a longer ember. The burn held through supper. At 9:40 it still dried mittens. At 12:05 she rose, cleared the ash ring by feel, and went back to bed with her wrists black. Toby slept till first light. That victory made no noise. Snow came steady the last week of October. Not a blizzard yet, just work snow. Clara measured it each morning on the door frame with knife notches. October 27th, 3 inches. On October 28th, she cut another notch, 5 inches, drifted 9 on the north side. By October 30th, the mark stood at 11 inches after wind. She copied each notch into the ledger after supper. Toby traced the marks and said, "We beat it again." He still could not chop. So Clara gave him jobs that counted. Sort shavings by size, roll kindling twists, keep the walnuts dry, watch flame color. Yellow and lazy meant damp charge. Clear blue meant good pull. Red pulse meant too much air. In early November, Harlan the storekeeper rode in and read a credit list under the cookhouse eave. No more kerosene on open promise, he said. No flour without work, cash, or company order. He looked straight at Clara. You've got sewing, but not enough. I've got a heater men come to feel. Feeling is free. Warmth isn't. Some men laughed. Rusk did not. He had stood in her door one dawn when the mill post showed 8 above outside and found Toby asleep without shivering. Harlan gave her a trade chit for half a gallon of kerosene anyway, debt against future washing. She wrote it in the ledger before she lit the lamp. November 4th. Harlan chit, 1 half-gallon oil, debt. Toby asked what debt meant. It means tomorrow's already promised. The first real pushback came when snow blocked the millside door. Sweepings piled thick under the saw tables. Clara arrived after shift with her sacks. Jory Pike put his boot on one. Company dust costs now, he said. That chit buys this much. He kicked a little pile toward her. The rest is for us. It rots there. It beds horses. There are no horses in this shed. The men laughed. Toby stood by the jam with his sleeves over his hands and looked ready to burst. Clara scooped only the amount allowed. Then she came back next evening with a broom and offered to sweep the whole floor if she could keep the extra. Men hate sweeping more than meanness. They agreed to shame her. It saved her. For 2 hours each night, she swept under benches, around gear housings, and into corners where resin held dust in clumps. Toby held the lamp and watched for nails. Her back burned from it. Her hands swelled. Yet she brought home enough for 2 charges each night and wrote every haul like wages. November 7th. Mill sweep, 2 sacks. Jory witness. November 8th. 1.5 sacks. Wet dust south wall. Names on paper mattered. By November 10th, Toby's toes were better, but a dry cough started at dawn. Clara moved quicker. Kettle on the old stove for moisture. Cot head lifted on blocks. Wraps warmed on the drum before changing. Hot water at 7 p.m., with molasses if she had it. The drum now had its own schedule, and she wrote it on a board slat by the door. Pack 4:30. Light 4:45. Clear ash 9:30. Check again at midnight. Top shavings only if wind rises. Einar brought her a crate thermometer with a cracked wood mount. She traded 2 glove finger repairs for it. She nailed it beside the door and began taking room readings. November 12th before dawn. Outside 6 above, cot 34 by drum 52. November 13th, outside 2 above, cot 39 by drum 57. The numbers steadied her. The blizzard week began November 16th with mean wind and no snow. By noon, the mill shut. Men tied tarps and braced stacks. Rusk told Clara to stay indoors after dark. At 3:20, the first snow bands hit sideways and found every nail hole. She packed the drum tighter than usual, wider center shaft, fresh clay seal. Toby coughed twice while she worked and tried not to show it. By supper, the north wall had white lines where powder leaked through. At 8 o'clock, a board tore loose on the woodshed and left the slab pile open. Clara wrapped Toby in both quilts with a hot stone and went out with hammer and nails. Wind cut her face. The lamp would not hold. She worked by touch and got the board set back enough to stop the drift. Inside at 8:35, the drum was running hot, and Toby was awake and scared by the wall noise. Clara sat beside him and counted gusts out loud until his breathing settled. At 11:10, the draft turned bad. Wind shoved down the pipe and smoke smeared from the collar. She cracked the door, tied a grain sack over the pipe cap line outside to break the gust, then narrowed the lower slot to a thumb width. It worked a while. At 11:35, a back puff threw sparks from the lid seam. One landed near the old black crescent on the floor. Same seam. Same danger. She slapped it dead with the wet rag she kept in the pail. Toby cried then, quiet and hard. Clara dragged the sandpan tighter, pulled the clay bucket close, and stayed kneeling by the drum through midnight. At 12:22, she scraped the lower screen. By 12:48, she resealed a seam split. Near 1:15, she fed a damp ring of dust to calm the burn. At 1:40, she checked Toby's toes. Warm. Before 2:05, she marked the slat. Cot 41/drum 61-blizzard. Toward 3:00, a child screamed outside, and lanterns whipped near the Pritchard annex. Their stovepipe had dropped, and Mrs. Pritchard's little Nell was shaking with cold. Clara looked at Toby. He was awake and frightened, but he nodded. With Einar and Rusk, she lifted the drum on an iron tray and carried it through the blowing dark. The clay seam cracked. Heat burned through Clara's mitten at the wrist. In the annex, they set the drum on brick by Nell's cot. Clara showed Mrs. Pritchard the air slot and the ash screen. For an hour, the little heater held that room warm enough for the shaking to ease. Then they carried it back before Toby's old stove died. By daylight, there was a bright ash trail in the snow between the two shacks. The storm broke on November 17th in the afternoon. Drifts stood chest high on the north side. The road was gone. One bunk roof edge had caved. Clara cut a new mark on the door frame. 34 inches drifted at the post. Toby touched the notch and whispered, "We would have froze if the wood got wet." She only nodded. Camp talk changed after that. Clara did not turn the heater into a secret. When people asked, she made them stand where she could see their boots and listen. She showed the raised base first, not the flame, then the sand pan. Next came the wall notes. Last, she pointed to the black crescent on the floor, where one careless tilt had marked the boards. On the back of a lard label, she sketched the punch pattern for the lower holes and wrote, "Do not set on wood." Mrs. Pritchard copied it. Jory's wife copied it. Even Jory, pretending he was only waiting out the wind, watched where Clara placed the screen and how she packed coarse curls at the bottom. By evening, Clara had 2 more small proofs in the ledger, a butter wrapper note that read, "Pritchard heater holes 8+ slot," and a store scrap from Jory's wife trading 1 ham bone for a lesson at First Light. She was still poor. She was no longer dismissed the same way. Men came to ask how long a charge lasted. Women asked how many holes to punch and how high to raise the base. Harlan sent word he would trade kerosene for a heater lesson to 2 families. Clara made him write the terms on a clean store chit. 1 quart kerosene plus 25 pounds flour for heater setup and instruction. She tucked it in the ledger like a banknote. The change cost her. After the blizzard, her split thumbnail swelled and turned angry. Her back locked while sweeping. One morning, she could not close her left hand on the broom. Toby saw it and took the scoop bag. He still could not swing an axe. He could sort shavings and pack a charge, so Clara taught him each step plain, coarse first, then medium, then fines, center shaft straight, no wet clumps, screen clear, slot 1 finger in wind, 2 in calm. He repeated it until he could say it half asleep. On November 24th at 4:42 p.m., Toby lit the drum while Clara sat and watched. The flame took clean. No smoke back, no sparks. At 9:30, he cleared the ash with the awl while she held the lamp. Clara wrote with a sore hand. November 24th, Toby tended full charge, toes warm. Thanksgiving passed quiet with beans, oat bread, and 1 spoon each of apple butter from Mrs. Pritchard. December came with nights sharper than storms. On December 3rd, the mill post read 12 below before dawn. The old stove alone could not keep the room above freezing unless Clara fed it every hour. On the drum, packed right and cleaned once, held a slow heat ribbon all night. At 4:10, she checked the cot-side thermometer twice to be sure. 38 by Toby's blanket. She tacked another note to the wall. December 3rd to 12th out. Cot 38. Dust stove carried. By mid-December, 3 other shacks had drum heaters on brick and sand bases. Rusk ordered no drum to run on bare boards after Jory's rug edge smoked. People called it Clara's rule when she was not there. Harlan began selling sweepings by sack, and Clara disliked him for learning profit from her work, but he kept their trade terms. Flour sat in the bin. Lamp oil waited by the shelf. Harlan even sent a packet of needles once, wrapped with a note from him. For patch records. Toby's patch, slips stacked up. Sock toe number 5. Mitten palm number dry. Boot lining restitch, Zevin and Twintig holes, and he wrote some of them himself by Christmas week. No letter came for them with the church rider. Toby took it quietly and sat near the drum. "Maybe Mama thinks we moved," he said. Clara turned the ash ring with the awl and looked at the black crescent on the floor by the base. "It doesn't matter what she thinks tonight," she said. "What matters is the fire, your feet, and morning." He nodded. January brought lean days and less wood, because the families now kept room notes and sack counts. The women went to Rusk together and showed him the numbers. Wood saved, children sleeping warmer, fewer missed shifts after storms. Rusk posted a rule on the mill wall: 1 sweeping's allotment per family at fixed rate, no extra charge during storm weather. Toby read it out slowly. Clara did not smile much, but she smiled then. A practice had changed. Late in January, one deep cold night, the pipe cap froze with drift and soot. At 1:30, smoke backed low while Toby slept. Clara woke with burning eyes and moved by habit. Door cracked, slot closed, blanket over Toby's face, hammer and all. Outside in moonlight, she knocked the cap clean and came down hard on one knee in the drift. Inside, she repacked the seam and watched the draft recover. At 2:10, she added another wall note: "Check cap before bed and at moonrise in deep cold." After that, Toby checked it with her. By February, his toes fit inside the boots with wool wraps and no crying. The skin stayed pink. He still favored the foot when tired, but he walked. That was enough. When March thaw began and water ran under the north wall, Toby started helping Einar cut short pine with the handsaw while Clara watched his stance, and still too small for heavy splitting, no longer too small to keep a house warm. One mild evening, Clara opened the blue ledger to the first cold weather page and read the line about 9 days of flour and lost toes. Then she wrote one more entry: "Proof kept. Floor scorch, wall notes, snow marks, trade chits, patch counts, boy walking." Toby read it back to her. The room was plain as ever. Patched boards, mending basket, drum stove on clay and brick, sandpan ready. Nothing in camp had become easy. But on the floorboards, the black half-moon scorch mark stayed visible in the light, and it told the winter true. Please subscribe and come back for the next frontier story.